My family cut me off because my happy relationship made my sister feel bad about hers. They banned me from family events and skipped my wedding when I refused to pretend I was miserable. Hey everyone. Before we kick off today's video, I've got a favor to ask. We've noticed our channel isn't getting as much love lately, and subscribing is one of the easiest ways you can help us out. It's quick, free, and it means we can keep bringing you awesome content. Your support really means a lot, so let's work together to keep this channel growing. Thanks a bunch. Now, let's dive into the video. I never imagined my happiness could bother anyone, but turns out I was wrong. It all kicked off last spring when I brought Dayla to my dad's birthday dinner. Looking back, I really should have noticed the red flags, but I was on cloud 9 with how well life was going, oblivious to the storm brewing around me. Delpha and I had been an item for about 8 months, and things between us were amazing, no forcing it, no walking on eggshells. We just gelled perfectly. He had this knack for making me laugh every day and genuinely listening to my endless chatter about work, hobbies, or whatever random thoughts crossed my mind. With him, I always felt good enough, never too much or too little. Our conversations flowed endlessly, but even when we were silent, it was a comfy kind of quiet. I was genuinely excited to see him every day, a feeling I'd never had before. So, when my dad's 55th birthday rolled around, I couldn't wait to introduce Dayla to more of my family. My mom and stepdad met him a few weeks earlier and absolutely adored him. Mom couldn't stop texting about how he was the perfect mix of polite and funny, and how she hadn't seen me that happy in ages. My stepdad, who usually takes ages to warm up to anyone new, even invited Dayla to go fishing, which was a big deal. But Dad's side of the family? That was a whole different story. There's always some kind of drama, usually involving my half-sister, Rebecca, who, at 28, often acts more like she's 16. She's got a history of falling for guys who are bad news, a married coworker, a guy still living with his roommate ex, and another who skipped out on a loan she gave him. Every time it hit the fan, she'd call Dad and my stepmom, and they'd rush to her rescue with ice cream and assurances it wasn't her fault. They'd dissect every text and conversation, blaming the guys and emphasizing how she deserved better. Problem is, she never seems to learn from these experiences, since Dad and my stepmom always bail her out. They pay her rent when she's splurged on gifts for the wrong guys, co-sign loans when her credit's shot, and let her crash at their place at least twice a year when things get really bad. Anyway, I showed up at the birthday dinner with Dayla, hand in hand, feeling genuinely happy, thinking my family would be thrilled for me after all those past relationship disasters. Remember my 2-year engagement that went south because my fiancé got cold feet about marriage? Yeah, I'd spent a lot of time solo, working on myself before meeting Dayla. I expected them to be happy for me. But from the moment we sat down, the whole vibe felt off. Everyone was being polite, asking Dayla the usual questions about his job and where he grew up. As always, Dayla was charming, sharing funny stories from his job as a physical therapist and showing genuine interest in everyone else. I noticed my dad even seemed to like him, though he was trying to play it cool. Rebecca was there too, fresh from a breakup with a guy who turned out to be full of lies, fake photos, fake profile, the works. She'd been texting all week about what a nightmare it was, convinced good guys just didn't exist, even contemplating a future as a crazy cat lady. I'd tried to be supportive, but I was getting pretty tired of the same conversation about her bad taste in men. She sat across from me at dinner, picking at her food, looking miserable. I felt for her because breakups suck, even when predictable. But then Dayla shared a story about an elderly patient learning to walk again after hip surgery. It was funny and heartwarming, and I was laughing along with him, enjoying his storytelling. That's when my stepmom Karen made a remark about how it must be nice to be so carefree and happy all the time. Her tone was weird, and when I glanced up, Rebecca looked close to tears, staring at her plate. I felt awful because it hadn't crossed my mind how my happiness might be hard for Rebecca to handle right then. I tried to steer the talk towards her new job, but she wasn't interested. Dinner wrapped up with a lot of awkward silences and a distinct weirdness. Dayla and I left as soon as we could without being rude. On the drive home, he asked if everything was okay, sensing the same uncomfortable vibe I had. I explained about Rebecca's breakup and worried I'd come off as insensitive. Dayla understood, but he didn't think I should have to hide my happiness to make others feel better. I thought that was that. But the next morning, Karen texted me, asking if we could talk. I assumed she wanted to clear the air about dinner, but she laid into me about how I was supposedly being insensitive to Rebecca by flaunting my relationship when she was down. I was baffled, thinking I was just being myself, sharing my life with my family like I always did. Karen suggested I tone down my happiness and public displays of affection around Rebecca, asking me to be more supportive of her needs right now. I pointed out that I'd always been there for Rebecca, listening to her relationship woes without making it about me. But Karen insisted this was different and Rebecca needed her family more than ever. I said I'd try to be mindful of how I came across, but hiding my happiness to protect Rebecca's feelings wasn't fair. That call stuck with me for days, leaving me unsettled. I couldn't quite place why Karen's logic felt wrong, so I talked it over with Delpha. He thought it sounded like they were asking me. So, I've been trying to downplay myself to deal with Rebecca's issues, which was pretty unhealthy for anyone involved. Still, I didn't want to stir up drama with the fam. I figured I'd just be more chill about my relationship when I was around them, even though it felt awkward and kind of fake. Fast forward a couple of weeks to my cousin's graduation party. Dayla couldn't make it because of work, so I went solo. Even then, I got these weird looks from Karen and my dad whenever I cracked a smile or laughed at a joke. Rebecca showed up with this new guy she was dating. At first, he seemed alright, but pretty soon, it was clear he was one of those know-it-all types who just can't help but argue with everything anyone says. Rebecca was all over him, even when he was being a jerk to others. I caught my dad and Karen exchanging looks, but nobody said anything to her right then. After the party, Karen pulled me aside and said she'd noticed I seemed more relaxed without Dayla around and suggested I come to family stuff solo for a bit until Rebecca got into the groove of her new relationship. I was floored because that was not the plan we discussed. I told Karen the first thought we were just talking about being more considerate, not ditching Dayla from family gatherings. But she said his presence made things tougher for Rebecca and that it'd only be a temporary move until Rebecca felt more stable. She said it'd help the family vibe if I could just roll with it for now. I was like, absolutely not. I told her Dayla was my partner, and I wasn't going to hide him like some kind of secret just because Rebecca couldn't handle seeing other people happy. Karen got all defensive, saying I was being selfish and putting my own wants above my sister's emotional health. But it didn't feel like a tiny sacrifice to me. I told Karen flat out that Rebecca was a grown woman and needed to manage her own issues instead of everyone rearranging their lives around her feelings. Karen said I was being cruel and insensitive, claiming Rebecca always had a hard time with relationships and needed the family's support. I pointed out that Rebecca kept landing in these messes because my dad and Karen never let her deal with the fallout of her bad decisions, always rushing in to save her or making everyone else adjust to her problems. Karen thought that was an awful thing to say about my sister. She couldn't believe I was being so cold and selfish when Rebecca needed help the most. Things got heated, with Karen accusing me of being jealous of the attention Rebecca gets from my dad. I fired back, saying I was just trying to live my life without causing drama that needed family rescue. By the end, we were both mad, and Karen suggested I reflect on what kind of sister and daughter I wanted to be. She told me I was welcome to join family events when I could be more supportive and less self-centered. I left wondering how wanting to bring my boyfriend to family events made me selfish or unsupportive. I've been more than patient with Rebecca's string of relationship train wrecks for years without making her feel bad about her choices, even when they were obviously bad decisions from the jump. When I filled Dayla in, he was livid for me. He said my family was being unreasonable and manipulative, treating Rebecca's constant drama like something everyone had to cater to, while anyone who didn't play along was labeled as mean or unsupportive. I didn't hear from my dad or Karen for nearly 2 weeks after our blow-up, which was weird since we usually chatted or texted regularly. I kept expecting one of them to reach out, maybe apologize or suggest a compromise. But my phone stayed silent except for Rebecca's occasional texts griping about her boyfriend, who was apparently turning out to be not so great. Eventually, my dad called and said he'd reflected on what happened. He sided with Karen, saying I was insensitive to Rebecca's situation and that maybe some space would be good for everyone. He suggested I skip family gatherings until I could be more considerate of Rebecca's feelings and supportive of the family. I asked if he was really saying I couldn't come because I was too happy in my relationship. He said that wasn't it, but mentioned that my behavior had been selfish and hurtful and that actions had consequences. I told him fine, I'd respect his wishes, but felt he was making a mistake prioritizing Rebecca's inability to handle her problems over our relationship. He said if I insisted on being stubborn, maybe distance would help me gain perspective. I agreed that some distance might be good because I was tired of feeling guilty for having a solid relationship when everyone else seemed focused on supporting Rebecca's chaos. After the call, I sat in my car outside work and cried for like 20 minutes, upset that my own dad was basically cutting me off from the family because I wouldn't pretend to be miserable to make Rebecca feel better about her choices. It felt like a weird world where happiness was seen as a flaw and creating drama got you attention and support. Dayla found me when I got home, took one look at my face, and just pulled me into a hug, letting me cry. I spilled the whole story while he just comforted me. He said my family was toxic and I deserved better than to be made to feel like my happiness was a burden. He thought the break might actually be good, giving me space to see how screwed up the whole setup really was. The more I thought about it, the more I realized he might be right. My dad and Karen always treated Rebecca like she was delicate, needing constant shielding from reality while expecting me to be self-sufficient without support. When I'd had relationship troubles, they'd barely give advice, but with Rebecca, they'd spend ages analyzing everything to help her out. Over the next few weeks, I started enjoying the break from family drama. I didn't have to tiptoe around Rebecca, worrying if I was too happy or successful in a way that might upset her. Dayla and I hit up concerts, tried new spots to eat, and went on weekend getaways without me having to worry if it would make Rebecca feel bad about her life. It was so freeing to just be without constantly second-guessing myself. My mom noticed I seemed more at ease when we had lunch one Saturday. I told her about the blow-up with my dad's side of the family, and she was appalled. She said expecting me to hide my happiness to protect someone else's feelings was emotional manipulation. Healthy families should celebrate each other's wins, not treat them like threats to someone else's well-being. She also pointed out that Rebecca was almost 30 and had been caught in the same relationship drama cycle for over a decade. Maybe it was time she took responsibility instead of everyone else handling her emotions. My mom said she'd watched this play out for years, always worrying that my dad and Karen were doing more harm by cushioning Rebecca from the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, Rebecca kept texting me to vent about her new boyfriend, who was problematic in new ways. He was bad with money, expected her to foot the bill for everything, had a temper, and was starting to make troubling comments about how she should act and dress. I got frustrated with these texts because it was so clear she'd picked another dud. But I knew if I pointed that out, she'd get defensive and accuse me of being unsupportive, just like my dad and Karen had said. So, I mostly stuck to generic replies like, "That sounds tough, and you deserve better." It felt fake, but it kept the peace. So, it seemed like everything was just what she wanted. After about 6 weeks of this whole setup that my dad's side of the family forced on us, Delpha and I were having dinner at our favorite spot. Out of nowhere, he got all serious and said he had something big to ask me. My heart started pounding because I thought he was going to dump me. But nope, he pulls out a ring box and asks if I want to spend forever making each other happy. I said yes before he could even finish because being with Delpha made me feel truly seen and supported, and I couldn't imagine life with anyone else. The ring was just perfect, simple but elegant. When I put it on, it felt like it had always been there. We spent dinner dreaming about our future, the house, trips, and life we wanted to build together. Everything felt possible and super exciting. We agreed we didn't want a long engagement, we just wanted to dive into married life with a small, intimate wedding with the people who really mattered. I started thinking about who to call with the news, and realized I wasn't exactly thrilled to tell my dad and Karen. I knew they'd somehow make it about Rebecca's issues or lecture me about our relationship. So, I called my mom first, and she was over the moon. She knew Delpha was the one for me from the start and couldn't wait to have him officially in the family. My best friend, who introduced us, was thrilled and offered to be my maid of honor, which made me cry tears of joy. But when it came to calling my dad, I kept stalling because I didn't want to deal with his likely complicated reaction. Delpha noticed I was stressed about telling my dad, and when I explained everything, he reminded me their opinion shouldn't really matter for our decision to get married. He was right, but it still sucked knowing my dad would probably make it about someone else's problems. I hoped the engagement might somehow fix things between us, but when I finally called him, the conversation was just as bad as I feared. He congratulated me in this unenthusiastic way and then bombarded me with questions about the wedding plans, like he was interviewing me. He even suggested we wait until all the family stuff was resolved, which basically meant waiting for Rebecca to sort out her life. I told him Delpha and I weren't putting our lives on pause. That didn't go down well and things escalated from there. I ended up crying in the kitchen, but Delpha reassured me that our wedding would be beautiful with the people who truly love and support us. Planning the wedding with my mom and friends felt so much easier without worrying about those who didn't really want to be there. We found a perfect venue at a winery, and planned a meaningful ceremony. I kept hoping my dad would reach out, but nothing. Just texts from Rebecca about her latest drama. I decided to send an invite to my dad anyway, hoping he'd come around, but when I called to tell him, he said he and Karen didn't think it was right to attend. I asked if he was really choosing to miss my wedding because of Rebecca's feelings, and he said it wasn't about that, but about unresolved issues. It just showed me where his priorities were. He wanted me to apologize and commit to supporting Rebecca more, but I had nothing to apologize for. That chat ended with him saying I was being selfish. So, here's the scoop. I was having this awkward chat with my dad about how he was being pretty inconsiderate towards the rest of the family. I told him, "Hey, I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree on what family support means to us." And then I added, hoping he'd be cool with his choice, "Hope you're okay with the decision when you're explaining why you skipped your daughter's wedding." When I shared this with Delpha, he straight up called my dad manipulative and emotionally abusive, saying I deserved way better than feeling like my happiness depended on keeping everyone else comfy. He was all in, telling me our wedding was gonna be awesome since it'd be full of folks who genuinely loved and supported us, without any of that toxic drama. And boy, was he right. The wedding day was hands down the best and most joyful day ever. My mom stepped up to walk me down the aisle since my dad bailed, and she was beaming with pride. I nearly teared up right there. Everything about the ceremony was spot on, intimate, heartfelt, and surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to celebrate our love. My mom killed it with her speech at the reception, talking about how she'd watched me grow into someone who deserves to be cherished, and how grateful she was for Delpha being in my life. My best friend shared how obvious it was that Delpha and I were meant to be, saying she'd never seen two people so perfect for each other. It was just what a wedding should be, a love fest without any drama, pure joy and support from those who truly mattered. But oh boy, the post-wedding drama was something else. After our honeymoon, I started getting these angry texts from Karen, saying she was hurt and felt betrayed that we went through with the wedding without trying harder to include them. She couldn't believe I'd ruined family ties over something she saw as minor. Rebecca was apparently heartbroken seeing the wedding pics online, and Karen slammed me for flaunting my happiness knowing Rebecca was having a rough time. It was wild how, even after skipping my wedding, she was making it about Rebecca's feelings, ignoring any mistakes on their part. I told Karen the first hadn't destroyed any family relationships, I just stopped letting my happiness be hostage to someone else's unresolved issues. If missing my wedding devastated them, maybe they should have reconsidered their priorities. I said they were invited to my big day and chose not to come because admitting they'd been wrong and treating me was too much. Karen fired back, claiming I'd changed, become selfish and distant, and how disappointed she was. She talked about how Rebecca looked up to me but now felt rejected. As I read her message, it hit me how Karen lived in a different reality where I was supposed to be grateful for getting treated like the family's second choice. Setting boundaries and demanding respect was painted as selfish, and she genuinely believed I should have sacrificed my happiness for Rebecca's emotional hang-ups. I decided not to engage with this twisted dynamic where Rebecca's issues were somehow my responsibility. So, I blocked her number and turned my focus to enjoying my new life with Delpha. My dad called weeks later, and I thought maybe he'd apologize or something. Nope, he launched into a speech about how I needed to make amends with Karen and Rebecca, insisting family should come first. I challenged him, asking how he could say family was top priority when he missed my wedding rather than admit to treating me unfairly. I pointed out that I'd always put family first, but realized it had to be mutual respect, and I wasn't going to keep sacrificing my well-being for people who didn't value me. We went back and forth, him saying I was dramatic for putting my needs first, and me pointing out that asking for respect once wasn't unreasonable. After roundabout arguments, I finally told him I loved him but wasn't going to keep repeating ourselves, and that if he wanted a relationship, he needed to accept I'm an adult deserving of respect. He hoped I'd come around to seeing his view, but I made it clear I wasn't apologizing for wanting happiness. Delpha stood by me, proud that I was standing up for us, saying real love wouldn't demand I shrink myself for others' comfort. Updates on Rebecca's life came through family. She'd gotten involved with a married gym guy, which blew up, then moved on to some older divorced guy with a lot of baggage. Same story, Rebecca calling my dad and Karen in tears, them rushing to comfort her. My cousin told me my dad was covering Rebecca's rent due to her crumbling work performance post-breakup. Meanwhile, Delpha and I were thriving, loving married life. We bought a cozy house with a garden full of tomatoes and herbs, plus adopted Charlie, a goofy rescue dog who kept us laughing. Then, about 8 months after the wedding, my dad called, marking the return of family chaos. Rebecca had been hospitalized after a suicide attempt, leaving a note about feeling like a failure compared to me and tired of being the family letdown. This hit me hard. I never wanted anything bad for her, and knowing she might have hurt herself related to me was devastating. I asked if she was okay, and my dad said she was stable but needed a few days under observation. He mentioned Rebecca specifically asked for me, wanting to talk about our family mess, hoping this crisis could bring us together. I was all about fixing the mess that had been splitting us apart. I told my dad, sure thing, I'd absolutely come to the hospital if Rebecca wanted to see me. No matter our differences, she's still my half-sister and I care about her. But on the drive over, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Something about the way Dad had talked seemed a bit off, kind of manipulative, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Anyway, when I got to the hospital, Dad and Karen were in the waiting room looking absolutely beat. Karen burst into tears when she saw me, saying she was glad I showed up because Rebecca really needed me. Dad gave me a hug and tried to pitch it as a silver lining to this crappy situation, like maybe it could bring us all back together. I asked to see Rebecca, and a nurse led me to her room. She was lying there, looking so pale and worn out. When she saw me, she started crying, saying sorry for everything and that she'd been so jealous of my happiness. Apparently, my marriage and great life with Delpha made her feel like her own life was empty. She'd been driving herself crazy trying to find someone who'd love her like Delpha loves me, but every bad relationship just made things worse. Listening to her, I felt awful. I never wanted my happiness to be anyone's pain. I told her that her value was way more than her relationship status and that she deserved love and happiness too. I apologized for her struggles and told her I wished she'd reached out before things got this bad. Then she dropped a bomb on me. Dad and Karen told her I thought she was pathetic, desperate, and that I was laughing about it with Delpha. I was floored. I never said anything like that. I immediately told Rebecca I didn't say those things and asked where she heard them. Turns out, Karen told her she overheard this non-existent convo between me and Delpha mocking Rebecca's dating life. I was furious. Karen had lied to paint me as the bad guy. I told Rebecca the conversation never happened and that Karen was feeding her lies. Rebecca seemed confused because Karen was allegedly so sure, and my happiness just seemed to highlight her misery. We spent about an hour talking through her feelings. I tried to help her see her worth beyond relationships and remind her of all her great qualities. When I left, she seemed a bit better and said she appreciated me coming and hoped we could rebuild our relationship. But back in the waiting room, I was ready to explode. I confronted Karen about her lies, and she got all defensive, claiming Rebecca must have misunderstood. Things got heated. Dad jumped in, saying this wasn't the time for arguments and we needed to support Rebecca, not fight. I agreed on supporting Rebecca but wasn't going to tolerate lies and manipulation. It all blew up into a big argument right there in the waiting room. Dad told me that if I couldn't be supportive, maybe I should leave. So I did, feeling like I'd been through the ringer. It felt like a setup to drag me back into the family drama I'd tried so hard to escape, using Rebecca's crisis as their tool. When I got home and told Delpha, he was fuming about Karen's lies. He called out how manipulative and gross it was to use a suicide attempt to mess with family ties. Over the following days, Dad kept calling, asking me to see Rebecca because she felt better with me around. But Karen was always there with her passive-aggressive comments. After about a week of that, I told Dad that I'd support Rebecca but wouldn't take the blame for problems I didn't cause. Using her crisis to manipulate me was making things worse. He said I should take responsibility for my role in her breakdown if I cared about her. I said I absolutely cared about Rebecca, but I wasn't the cause of her issues. Rebecca got out of the hospital with a therapy and medication plan, and I checked in on her regularly. I had to keep my distance from Dad and Karen because they weren't stopping with their games. Finally, I had enough. I told Dad that I'd had it with being the scapegoat while they played the victim. He said I was being dramatic and that I'd regret leaving the family over this. I told him the only thing I regretted was wasting time trying to make things work with people who'd never see me as anything but the villain. That was my last talk with Dad. It's been over a year now. Rebecca and I text sometimes, and she's doing better with therapy and setting boundaries with Dad and Karen, helping her grow more independent and self-aware.